Hello, Upper Iowa students. Welcome to week 11. We are finishing up with a part 3 series of ACEs and being trauma informed. And we are also putting in some crisis prevention, postvention as part of this presentation as well, and as a focus of content this week. So the great thing that I love about this week is that I'm doing a collaboration of sorts with a good friend of mine, but he also started as one of my practicum students, and I got to supervise him in internship as well. Andy Eisman is a high school counselor at Cedar Falls, and he is going to be a part of our presentation today, being able to kind of give a perspective of his high school lens of how they have kind of gone through, but also learned from mistakes as part of our state required ASIST training, and how we are working with our staff towards being more trauma informed. And especially at the beginning of the year when we have to take our required trainings through the AEA and doing that online, being able to do it with fidelity, but also having it mean something and not just another box to check off. And so I love his perspective on this, and he's going to join us in this instructor video this week. Okay, so like I said, we're going to follow up with a part 3 series on ACEs. Andy is going to be able to help talk about our district's approach to the required ACEs training, like I've mentioned. And so he gives a really good perspective on that. We're also going to sign the Ask a Position statements for the Safe Schools and Crisis Response and Suicide, but also the Ask a Position statement on prevention and awareness. Then we are going to move into specific crisis intervention strategies. You guys are going to hear about QPR and the ASIST model to assist student crisis with suicide. That is the training that we've had here in Cedar Falls. Some of you work in schools where maybe you've had other trainings, and I think you would be able to provide some great perspective with that. You can just get a glimpse of the training that we've had here. Lastly, your discussion question for the week, and don't forget to respond to a peer, as well as what's ahead. All right, so our ACEs follow-up trauma-informed part 3. This is where I'm gonna have Andy talk a little bit about how they approach this at the high school, because to be honest, I would say it's very similar across all schools in our district, especially at the secondary level, where we work with more of the staff and have those common conversations and experiences.
Hey, everybody. At the beginning of every school year, we have required trainings that need to be done. One of those is the ACEs, and the other is the post and prevention. So postvention, prevention regarding suicide. Those are modules that are facilitated by the AEA, and so it's all online. And there's a couple of pros and cons to how we do this as a district. So I can speak to it from Cedar Falls High School. One year we did a presentation, so an in-house created presentation regarding ACEs prior to the staff doing the module. And the pro and con to that is, you put 90 people in a room, somebody in the room going, oh my gosh, that's me. And now, instead of being focused on the training and how we can best serve students and how we can be intentional with our words and language and activities, instead it's like, ooh, I'm now thinking about my big stress, either from a previous experience or maybe an experience I'm feeling right now. That's a stressful situation to put people in, because all of a sudden you have, for us, we had 100 staff members in the room, and it warranted some individuals were uncomfortable talking about trauma, stress, because it's triggering for their own. So that was an oversight on our part. We have now pivoted where we offer individuals and collaborative teams the opportunity to do the trainings on their own. So that gives the flexibility of like, yes, I'm in the right headspace to dive into this, or I'm in the right space physically for my own comfort. The drawback to that is, of course, the fidelity of the trainings. So if you haven't yet done an AEA training, with them being online, it's very much a pull it up, read the slide, and click ahead. Some of them have some built-in like timers, so you can't advance until X amount of time has passed on that page. But what we are now finding is that we have educators who are like, I've done this ASIS training every year. I know what it is. I just want to click, 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 click and get through it. So they're not really doing it with fidelity. Not a malicious act, of course. All educators have 100 different things to get done, especially at the beginning of the school year. So it's just kind of reframing it as instead of I have to get this done, we're working on more professional development and in-service training at the beginning of the year of, yes, this is an item that we need to accomplish in terms of we need to go through this training. However, we also want to be intentional and have this as part of our universal design of learning so that all educators are viewing students through this trauma lens.
So I want you guys to think about a time that you had a big stress. What did you notice in your body, in your emotions? Obviously, I think about times where I've had big stresses, some more than others, and even good things can cause stress, stress. So we know that even there can be a good type of stress. But if I think about a big stressor, I notice my body getting really tense. Sometimes I get like lockjaw or my teeth grind. I also notice that my hands kind of clench because of that tension. And like they'll start sweating as well. My heart will race and I tend to get like a pressure right in my chest. That is how I know my body is physically responding to a big stressor. Obviously, my emotions, typically I'm overwhelmed. I'm quick to anger, I notice, maybe impatient. I feel very anxious about maybe getting everything done as a part of what's causing that stress.
Me personally, like I get a little fidgety, and I can also kind of feel my face getting warm and a little bit red. And then like emotion wise, like my brain starts going a million miles a minute and bouncing around. I like to tell students that sometimes our brain is like a ping pong game. And it's like ding, 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 like all over, where the balls are just rolling around and every ball is an idea or a stressor or whatever it may be.
And so I want you guys to think about what did you need that would have helped you at those times of experiencing a big stress. Sometimes I need to step away or I need to talk and take a break with a friend. Sometimes I just need some white space where there's nothing distracting me, where I can maybe use that mindful minute to, think about things with my five senses. What do I see? What do I smell? What can I feel? What am I tasting? Things like that, where I just kind of center myself a little bit. Sometimes I just need quiet. When I go out for walks, sometimes I don't even listen to music because sometimes I just need the quietness of that. So think about maybe who or what you needed at those times where you have experienced that yourself. Kids feel stressed too. This is something we all know, we've experienced, some of us more than others in our past and prior experience with students or in the schools. What you might not realize is that when that stress is too big or lasts for too long, and youth don't have the supports they need to soothe their reactions or help them regulate, children can be traumatized in ways that change the body and the brain and how they develop, especially when that overwhelming stress is prolonged and occurs during early childhood. And they don't have the skills to be able to regulate themselves, or maybe they don't have people in their lives that are helping them co-regulate. I remember someone using this analogy when I was learning about ACEs. You talk about like if you're walking in the woods and you're going for a hike and you approach a bear or a bear comes out of the woods, and that like fight, flight, or freeze that happens in like our amygdala, like what our body response is, and that high stress. And then, the phrase was, well, what if you go home to the bear? And so it's not like that moment where you approach it and you can run and you can get away. Some of our kids and even some as adults go home and live with that toxic stress where they are in fight, flight, or freeze for too long. And that's what makes that stress toxic. You guys have already learned a lot about ACEs in previous weeks and also within your own buildings if you have experience in education or are currently working as an educator. So how do they relate to toxic stress? So ACEs, we know, stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. These experiences can include physical and emotional abuse, neglect, caregiver, mental illness, household violence. We have all experienced the toxic stress of the pandemic. and what followed, and what is still happening. The more ACEs a child experiences, the more likely he or she is to suffer from things like heart disease and diabetes, poor academic achievement, and substance abuse later in life. And you guys heard that from the research that Dr. Nadine Burke said in her TED Talks last week. Within that presentation, she talked about this in a very engaging and real way when they're doing those longitudinal studies and seeing how that toxic stress lives out. It creates more negative outcomes. So toxic stress explains how ACEs really gets under the skin. If you think about, here, this picture, it's paralleling that to, the effect being similar to revving a car engine for days or weeks at a time. You think about how harmful that would be for a car. Sometimes I think in the past where I've had it in park, thinking maybe it was in reverse and I put my foot on the gas pedal and that rev, how even that moment's not good for the car, but if that would be long lasting. So again, experiencing many ACEs in childhood, early childhood, even things like racism, community violence, without having supportive adults, this can cause what's known as the toxic stress we talked about, maybe living with that bear in a sense. This excessive activation of the stress response system can lead to long-lasting wear and tear on the body and the brain.
We can actually see this now with these brain scans and all this research that's coming out about how toxic stress at any age can start to change our brain chemistry and how we can then react to stressors.
All right, so this graphic shows percentages of how many adults in Iowa report experiencing a certain number of ACEs. So you can see 14.5% of Iowa adults reporting experiencing 4 or more ACEs in their early childhood. So think about, given so many years down the road, how many more Iowans and really anyone will have higher ACEs scores, thinking about the pandemic and other big stressors that caused and put on families. You just think about those percentages and you think about what 4 or more ACEs, what those outcomes were physically, mentally, emotionally.
Toxic stress is really an endemic issue at this point. And we need to always have those trauma lenses on of, okay, I'm seeing a function of a behavior, not a student. Like this isn't student Johnny reacting to me and avoiding me because it's a me problem. This is how they've learned to respond to stress, and we are focusing in on how we can help with that.
So we've talked about this, ACE's impact on physical health. So again, this is kind of coming back to the CDC research, and that they found the trauma in childhood could reduce life expectancy by up to 20 years. They also looked at other things like kidney disease, stroke, heart disease, arthritis, heart attack, diabetes, cancer. I mean, you can just see the outcomes and research on this is just kind of astounding. It's really unfortunate that the likelihood with higher ACEs in early child development that they have higher chances of developing health conditions based on their ACE score. A lot of you have mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs in your discussion responses from weeks past, talking about how if we're not meeting students' basic needs of water and food and shelter, and providing that safety, that they're not going to be in a place where they will be able to learn in a classroom if they didn't eat breakfast that morning or the night before, or maybe they were homeless. They got kicked out of the hotel they were living in or a friend's house. We've had families where, they lost heat in their house. And so they were cold all night. I mean, you think about all the different experiences, but man, that hierarchy of needs has so many truths to when we think about what impacts achievement, success in attendance. Also, when we think about some protective factors. So, this isn't on here, but thinking about conditions or attributes that can help and decrease risks. Some of those would be like nurturing and attachment. So having an adult support who cares, maybe models those appropriate behaviors, has those positive interactions. And that's where adults at school can be that safe haven that provides that nurturing and positive attachment. Also, another protective factor, children's social emotional competence. And that's why it's so important that everyone universally is working to teach our students social emotional learning. It's so important because it protects them from more adverse childhood experiences, because it helps communicate clearly, helps them be able to recognize and manage their own emotions. Also, parental resilience. This is a big one, showing when bad things happen, we can work to make things better despite or through the hardship. So being able for parents to manage stress and role model that for their children is a protective factor, as well as knowledge of parenting and child development. No one knows it all, but obviously, if we're all doing the best we can and reach out for resources when we need it, it takes a village. Social connections are also a protective factor. So those positive relationships that offer relational, spiritual, instructional support. And lastly, concrete support in times of need. So when the going gets rough, real rough, who are those concrete support people in their lives that they can go to? So many of the obstacles traumatized children face in the classroom result from their inability to process the information, to process it meaningfully, distinguish between what's threatening and non-threatening. Again, when you live with the bear, that toxic stress for too long, you're always at a hypersensitive state where you can't all of a sudden tell the difference between what is threatening and what is not. There's also obstacles in forming trusting relationships with adults and being able to regulate their own emotions. So, tip of the iceberg and the behaviors we see, kids come to school with a lifetime of accumulated experiences, including interactions and relationships, many of which we are very unaware of. The experiences under the surface go a long way toward explaining the behavior we see in the classroom. The behavior we see is just the tip of the iceberg. This year, I want to challenge you to keep this analogy in our minds when thinking about students, how we can interact with them, how we respond to their behavior, that we really look beyond the surface level. And, this kind of leads us to a slide I have here in a little bit. Instead of, the question, what's wrong with you? What has happened to you? What's beneath the surface that we have not seen? So what you might see, these could be students that have difficulty with retrieving verbal information, linear processing, cause and effect relationships. You guys can kind of read through these. But again, you'll see that hypersensitivity, a sense of hopelessness, powerlessness, they withdraw, maybe they're impulsive, hypervigilant, avoid. I think we, can think of certain students when we think about these responses, or students that have difficulties in this, thinking about, what's below that tip of the iceberg for some of these kiddos. This trauma formula was presented to me in an ASIST training, and I just felt like it made so much sense. Thinking about what do we have control of at school, right? We can't control what happens at home, but we can sure try within our walls of our building. If you think about this, this could be true for students and staff as well, right? You experience trauma maybe outside of school. There's no way we can leave that at the door. It comes in the door with us. It is a part of us. It is a weight we carry. And sometimes you think about those setting events that just triggers that trauma, and how, the response is like an explosion, that fire, and the consequence of that. So sometimes I think about, a student in the past that I know was taken with a parent to a drug deal that went bad. And she saw her dad pull out a gun on another person. You think about that type of trauma. Well, then she comes to school and she acts out, and she's quick to use foul language to avoid. And so I think about certain setting events for her is if someone would call her out publicly in a classroom and not privately about that setting event, how that would really just set off a fire response in her, which would cause her to, maybe swear at adults or to kick a chair over. And you think about the consequence, she's getting, a consequence for that behavior in the classroom. I think about this being true for adults too. I think about trauma, maybe I've experienced in the past. A lot of it revolved around grief and how certain events at school or outside school can really set off and trigger that trauma response in myself, and how sometimes there's social consequences to that, and not that we want that to happen. But a lot of times when our body responds, we don't always have control of that, but hopefully we have control of how to regulate again. So trauma impacted youth. Wow. Again, difficulty managing those big emotions. The river of feelings kind of comes back to me in this from prior weeks: empathy, chronic irritability, expressing concerns, that ability to communicate needs, concerns, wants, taking into account the wider context of a situation. So seeing big picture, right? Appreciating one's behavior impacts other people. So they're not sure how they act, how that has a ripple effect to those around them, how that impacts more than just themselves. Being able to connect with others and work in a group. These are more difficulties we see with youth that have been impacted by trauma. I really like this visual because I just feel like in sharing this with teachers, it just gives us a very concrete kind of punch in the gut of thinking about times where we call students out or redirect or correct. And you think about, why students are late to school and why they're late for class. And you think about the different burdens and weights that they carry, the luggage, the baggage that they're carrying. And sometimes it's mentally ill parent, it's homelessness, they're hungry, they're sick, they're not getting their hierarchy of needs met, they don't feel safe at home. So if we were able to extend a little bit of grace and trying to seek to understand what they're going through, what's, at the bottom of that iceberg, so that we know that coming late to class isn't necessarily something that they're doing on purpose, that it's, one of those ripple effects of the other things going on. Also, I think it's so important as educators, if we approach every situation and interaction with the assumption that kids do well if they can. Doing well is always preferable to not doing well. If a kid has the skills to do well in the first place, they're going to. But if the kid had the skills to exhibit adaptive behavior, they probably wouldn't be exhibiting challenging behavior. Sometimes when kids don't know something in class, they don't know what's being taught, they don't understand, that's where we see some of those acting out behaviors. Trauma-informed movement changes the question. I mentioned this before. So instead of asking, what is wrong with you when a child is showing behaviors, asking what has happened to you and what is working for you currently and how can we build on that together. I think, recently you guys have read in your trauma-informed schools book, investigating the whys behind student behavior. According to, the author, Jen Alexander, youth are not giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. We assume they do well if they can. And so trauma-sensitive educators must consider why that might be, why they might be having a hard time. So what allows some people to overcome the trauma they have experienced, besides the protective factors that I mentioned before, these are also reasons: having that supportive relationship from a trusting adult, being able to have a sense of mastery over the circumstances in their life. They, that quote, 10% of life is what happens to you, 90% is how you respond to it. Obviously I didn't quote it exactly, but it's so much of how we respond to those life circumstances. Being able to have strong executive functioning and self-regulation skills, as well as a safe and supportive environment, and affirming faith or cultural traditions. This is a video that we're going to watch because I really like how it talks about the science of resilience. Again, being able to teach resilience is a way that we can provide a very objective way of helping students work through those life circumstances and not letting it overcome them.
Resilience is the result of a highly interactive process between individual characteristics in the person and the environment in which that individual has developed.
It's really the counterbalancing of difficult things that may exist in the child's life with positive things that occur within the family, but even positive things that may exist in the community.
An easy way of thinking about resilience is like a scale with a fulcrum in the middle of it. And there are things on both sides of that scale, experiences of both bad things or good things.
Our genes shape where the fulcrum is positioned at the start.
There are certain genes that make a child more sensitive to the effects of maltreatment or parental neglect or witnessing violence.
The fulcrum may start out kind of more towards one side or more towards the other side, and that's going to make a big difference in terms of how much these subsequent events affect things positively or negatively.
Science tells us that experience moves the fulcrum, for better or for worse.
Even though we are born with genes, genes will respond differently to certain environmental situations as opposed to others.
What the genes are actually doing are turning up or turning down the expression of chemicals in circuits in the brain and the circuitry in the entire body that govern our responses to stress, to anxiety, to depressive symptoms.
When positive experiences accumulate and children learn coping skills that help them to manage stress, the fulcrum can slide, so the scale tilts toward positive outcomes more easily. That's what resilience is all about.
There's always an adult, or more than one adult, who is key to providing that relationship that helps to build resilience.
All right, so reclaiming disconnected kids. We have very applicable steps here: listening and asking questions, seeking to understand, validate. Some of this you guys have read in interventions and strategies to connect when you think about your reading in trauma-sensitive schools. Expect to be tested and challenged, but really sustain that positive regard where you provide fail-safe relationships. Be curious, but not judgmental. We need to get a sense of their daily lives and without them feeling like they are judged by sharing. Help them solve problems and activate hope. Communicate the consistent message: I will not give up on you. And that's especially important when they are testing you. So ideas for connecting: celebrate successes no matter how small. So you see that on there. What if we spread around the good things kids were doing more than we spread the mistakes they have made? Obviously, positive phone calls home, handwritten notes. I love to send SMAC cards if you guys have heard of SMAC. I love, it's obviously an acronym, but look on their Facebook page. I love giving kids SMAC notes, and there's even a school one and students. Also, maybe share a meal together. I've done this where like a student has met and attended school and I buy them lunch. Sit down just for a couple minutes at breakfast or lunch, have a special lunch with them. Like I said, buy them Jimmy John's if that's what they want for their attended school. And they can even choose a friend or a few others to join. Value their background and culture. How can you take an interest in their culture and maybe have an opportunity to share that with the class, with you, just being able to celebrate that. Morning greetings. What if every student was greeted with a high five and their name at the door each morning? I think that's really overlooked, but such a powerful thing that students feel known by us. Power of Post-it notes. At the beginning of the year, I usually grab a pack of colorful Post-it notes and write students' names on one. And then over the next week, I jot a note and give it to the kid. It might be a note of praise for working hard or a note of encouragement after a rough day. By labeling them at the beginning of the week, I can ensure that those kids get one. It kind of holds me accountable. When the notes are all gone, I label another set of notes and kind of start over with that. I also think, short term for restorative practices, what can we do to connect? And I think it's important for us to be able to regulate our own emotions, be the safe person. If you lose control as an educator, you only validate or fulfill the self-fulfilling prophecy that you're unsafe. So it's important for us to regulate. Being able to approach students individually and not in front of the class if we're redirecting, that's so important as a restorative practice. Being aware of trauma symptoms, we're talking about that, but being aware of our own trauma triggers, have our own safe place to debrief so that we can keep it safe for our kids. Also, other interventions, just to share with you guys, calm, connect, correct, the 3 C's. So when a student is struggling, think of the 3 C's. You have to wait for them to cool down to do what you are asking them to do. You need a connection with them. Otherwise, they don't care and will want to do what you're asking them to do. They will do that if they have that connection with you. I would say methods to obtain classroom attention. Yelling is definitely not a safe choice to get a student's attention, especially one with ACEs. Clapping hands, holding up figures, like 1, 2, or 3, doing a countdown, teaching students ways to get their attention without yelling. Also, taking a classroom temperature, get the pulse of the room. Are they moody? having a bad day. Also, having natural consequences that aren't punitive. So you didn't do this, so this is not the consequence, but provide maybe two choices, like you didn't turn in your homework, so there is a natural consequence, but provide two choices based on their actions so that they feel like they have control over what happens. I think that helps, but obviously there are still natural consequences. Positive affirmations, say it aloud, have affirmations on walls, watch videos, and then back to basics with relationship building. It's all about the relationship. Ask the second question. Just don't ask a student one question. Follow up with a second question about their weekend or something outside school. Connect the kids to the school. However we can do this, engage students in extracurricular activities, enrichments. Once they get connected, they will engage in the school more often as well. People heal people. Who are your people? What helps regulate you? Your school people can be your people. We all have a village and need a village. Our kids need a village of support, and we are the people who have ample opportunity each day to provide healing through connection, relationship, and meaningful interactions in a safe environment. With this, I want to remind you guys to read the 2 position statements linked here. We are now going to head into our next piece with crisis intervention and prevention. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we have been trained here at Cedar Falls Schools, and just a model that we use that I think will help guide any conversation you have with students or adults when it comes to crisis intervention, but especially suicidal ideation. So I will tell you more about QPR and the ASIST model. QPR stands for question, persuade, and refer. These are 3 simple steps anyone can learn to help save a life from suicide. This is definitely a more simplistic version of the ASIST model, and that is why I'm starting with it. Similarly, just as people trained in CPR and the Heimlich maneuver, that helps save thousands of lives each year. People trained in QPR and the ASIST model learn how to recognize the warning signs of suicide crisis and how to question, persuade, and refer someone to help. So QPR can be learned in what is offered as their gatekeeper course in as little as 1 hour. And what is a gatekeeper? According to the Surgeon General's National Strategy for Suicide Prevention in 2001, a gatekeeper is someone in a position to recognize a crisis and the warning signs that someone may be contemplating suicide. Gatekeepers can be anyone, but include parents, friends, neighbors, teachers, school counselors, ministers, doctors, nurses, office supervisors, squad leaders, foremen, police officers, caseworkers, firefighters, and many, many others who are strategically positioned to recognize and refer someone at risk of suicide. Much of the world is familiar with CPR because it's an emergency medical intervention. The process is designed to stabilize people who aren't breathing or breathing intermittently and who may be in cardiac arrest until the person can reach a hospital or get other care. Similarly, QPR is an emergency medical health intervention for suicidal persons. The intent is also to identify and interrupt the crisis and direct that person to proper care. So both QPR and CPR are a part of the chain of survival. They are part of systems designed to increase the chance of survival in the event of crisis. So after the gatekeeper course, you will be able to learn and be trained in how to recognize the warning signs of suicide, how to offer hope, but also how to get help and save a life. So the ASIST model, this is more in depth, but really helps provide a focus in the flow of conversation to assist someone with thoughts of suicide. ASIST stands for Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And this is a training, it's a 2-day interactive skills-based workshop that prepares people to provide suicide first aid. Participants learn to apply the PAL model, which stands for Pathway for Assisting Life, and that guides a suicide first aid intervention through conversation. PAL facilitates a collaborative process through which caregivers recognize, acknowledge, and seek to understand the presence of suicide thoughts in others, and then work with them to develop a personal safe plan to keep them safe for now. And you will hear that phrase a lot, safe for now. The model features a pivotal turning point where persons thinking about suicide discover their uncertainty about killing themselves and then commit to focus on their immediate safety. So as you can see with the ASIST model, There are 3 different stages and ways of preventing suicide. So you have prevention at first, where you are hoping to reduce things that contribute to suicide. Then intervention, where you are increasing safety of the people at risk with thoughts of suicide. Obviously, suicide first aid, and this is part of that training. And then the postvention, helping people who could injure themselves or have, and those being affected by suicide. The pathway for assisting life, again, the PAL model has 3 different phases that we are going to work through. The first phase is connecting with suicide. And within this phase, there are 2 steps of exploring invitations and asking the question about suicide. In the second phase, it is understanding choices. And in this phase, you will go through steps of hearing their story and supporting a turning point. Then in the last phase of this PAL model, it's called Assisting Life. And here we have developing the SAFE plan and confirming those SAFE plan actions. So the PAL has 6 caregiver, or also gatekeeper, if we consider QPR, tasks that meet each one of the 6 needs identified by individuals with thoughts of suicide. Like I said, 2 of these pairs go in each phase. So as you can see, there are 6 tasks, but 2 go with each phase. So explore invitations and ask suicide, go with connecting with suicide. Again, hear story, support the turning point, go in the second phase of understanding choices, and develop the SAFE plan and confirm actions, go with that last phase, assisting life. The PAL model is often seen in a visual like this, where it is a 3-phase triangle, where again, you see that first phase, connecting with suicide, understanding choices in the middle, and moving over to assisting life. I really like this visual because it helps provide me a way of thinking where I am in the conversation with the person at risk that I'm providing suicide first aid. And it helps me see where I'm going within that conversation, kind of a goal in conversation, especially to assist the SAFE plan and keeping those persons safe for now. So if we are looking at the first task for caregivers or gatekeepers, we are exploring invitations in this first phase of connecting with suicide. So invitations are signs of distress that invite help. Anything the person with suicide thoughts says or does or makes you feel might be an invitation, and it could be an invitation. You want to accept those invitations, follow your intuition, explore the meaning of things you see and hear within that individual. This graphic with the balloons is also a way to kind of think about what those invitations could look like based on things that person at risk says with their words, how they describe their feeling, maybe physical responses or symptoms, as well as actions, things that they are doing. So if you think about who could be at risk for suicidal thoughts. Our group, when we did this training, really anyone could be at risk. Sometimes we think the marginalized groups, anyone in the LGBTQ community. We think of right now, the highest percentage is adult white males. But if we think about it, we know our teenagers are also at risk. So really, suicidal thoughts can affect anyone. We also think about events. What events would maybe cause these invitations to explore? Events could be anything from divorce to failure at school. It could be failure in relationships. Events could also be a pandemic. There's so many different life events that could be events that could cause someone to have suicide thoughts. We also think responses. How is someone responding? Maybe lack of sleep, lack of motivation. Maybe they are giving away possessions. Maybe they're not responding to people in their life anymore. They're distancing themselves from family. Maybe they're having physical complaints of headaches, weight loss, things like that. So when we're exploring invitations, these are things that a person in this conversation is telling us that is going on. And again, it could be anyone. We think about the events in their life, how they're responding to those events and what is going on, and explore the invitations that they're giving us that are essentially kind of saying that they need help, and explore the meaning of those things. The second task in that first phase of connecting with suicide is ask suicide, reasons to ask directly about suicide. You want to know the answer as the caregiver or gatekeeper. You want to know if this person is having thoughts of suicide. Also, by asking if they're having suicidal thoughts, it does not communicate that you think badly of the person. It really communicates that you care. It clearly says that suicide needs to be addressed. If the person is not thinking about suicide, you asking the question still shows and communicates that you care and that you are sitting with them in this conversation, exploring those invitations of things still going on in their life that are hard. But we also know research says by asking the question of suicide, it does not give someone the idea to commit suicide. It does not give someone the idea or more likely to have more ideation of suicide. And so it's important to ask the question. It's really important for caregivers and gatekeepers to practice saying out loud in multiple ways how you ask the question, because it makes it less intimidating to ask when you're actually with a person at risk. So just being able to say out loud, based on what you're saying, I'm wondering if you are having thoughts of suicide. Or you could ask in this way, are you thinking about suicide? There's another way of asking, have you had thoughts of killing yourself? I want you to pause this video and just say a couple of these ways of asking the question out loud, because again, it kind of breaks down the intimidation of being able to say it when you're actually using the PAL model with someone in crisis. Probably the phrase I use the most after I explore those invitations is say, based on what you're saying, I'm wondering if you're having thoughts of suicide. Understanding choices is our second phase, but the next task is hearing the story. To let someone know that you hear their story, you might say phrases like this. You said you can't live with this pain. Tell me more. You mentioned you are no good for anyone. How long have you felt like that? It sounds like there's no way you feel you can face this situation. So essentially affirming how they're feeling, that it's valid. Or you could say, tell me more about the last time you felt hope. I can tell you are hurting. What else does that feel like for you? And can you tell me about someone who has supported you before? So again, hearing the story is giving them the position to actually speak and tell their story. And it's so important that you are patient in hearing someone's story. I think even in a position as a school counselor, because we wear so many hats, hearing the story is actually probably the task that can get shortened or cut short too soon, that we are rushing the person through their story and not giving them the space to be able to tell it. And I think it's important that this is where we utilize our counseling skills the most, skills of paraphrasing what they're saying, skills of summarizing back what they have said, and then asking a question with that. Part of hearing the story is also reflecting their feeling, things that they have shared as part of their feelings, or reflecting meaning, what something means to them, and being able to explore that through their story, but also with your counseling skills. The next task in this second phase is support turning, and this is support the turning point. So turning points and ways to support them, these are different turning points that can happen. So essentially, someone could all of a sudden reject suicide. Maybe they actually found hope for something. Maybe they're all of a sudden uncertain about choices, or they have turned and they're at least willing to try. So if the turning point is reject suicide, they might say, what was I thinking? I don't want to kill myself. And to support that turning point, you could say, so we had better start working on a plan to keep you safe then. If they are hoping for something and they all of a sudden say, if I could only find a way to talk to my father, or maybe whoever that person is that is a turning point for them, you could respond with, so we need to start working on a plan that will include finding a way to talk to your father, or again, whoever that person is that is giving them hope. If we're uncertain about choices and they are just confused and they don't know, you can support that turning with, if you're not certain, we need to make a plan to still keep you safe for now. And then the last one, if they're willing to try, and they might state that they might as well find out what would be involved in a safe plan, you can support by you're willing to look at what's keeping you safe for now might involve. You can support with the question, you're willing to look at what keeping safe might look like right now, or what that might involve. Again, this is where your counseling skills of, reflection of feeling, reflection of meaning, paraphrasing and summarizing are so important, because as you look to find things that could be a turning point for them, and again, you want them to come up with their own turning point. You can't decide that for them. What's that one thing that could all of a sudden make them kind of pivot to reject suicide or hope for something, or all of a sudden feel uncertain about what they felt maybe was more definite before the conversation. The turning point is essentially an emotionally charged moment when the life side of the person experiencing suicide thoughts first starts to speak. It emerges from a feeling that their story of suicide has been heard, again, within that start of the second phase where you're hearing the story, but it signals that safety for now might be possible. So again, this is kind of what is happening within that person, that all of a sudden the life side is starting to speak, and it hasn't spoken in a while, maybe because they've had just those death sides for so long, and hearing their story maybe brought some hope, brought some light, and essentially made that life side start speaking and provides them hope for and willingness for a safety plan for now. So the last phase is assisting life. And the first step within this last phase is develop a safe plan. So you're wanting to figure out what is part of that safe plan and who is a part of that safe plan. The key phrase, what will keep you safe for now? I said that's really important to kind of keep in mind. We want to make sure, even if it's 5 minutes, 1 hour, one evening, the goal is to stay safe for now. So to develop a safe plan, you work through their immediate safety. So the first thing with safety first, we have safety guards, and we have safety aids. So with safety first, you can see on this chart, if harm to self and or others is occurring or about to occur, you immediately call 911. If the person is unable to participate in the safety plan, they need 24-hour monitoring, and this is why it's more of an emergency to call 911. Safety first hints are being familiar with resources in your community. Tell the person why you believe there's a good need for an emergency or monitoring response, just because it's more immediate. Evolve them in seeking help if possible. Use the least forceful action that is consistent with safety. Also, another hint, talk to the person while waiting for help to arrive. Usually for us as school counselors, that's parents in our setting. We also want to confirm that emergency or monitoring response did occur. So with safety guards, you can see in safety first, this is when we act with very direct guidance, where we are helping activate the emergency response because they can be still harmful to themselves. Maybe they still have access to lethal means. But if we move to safety guards, you will notice that it's kind of middle, that it's less direct guidance. But essentially, we're disabling the suicide plan. We're asking about alcohol, drug, and medication risk, use, or concerns, and exploring any prior suicide behavior and mental health concerns. So if we go back to the suicide plan, we ask what the suicide plan is. And this can be a part of asking the suicide question in that first phase. If they have access to those means and how to safely disable it. We want to ask about, how planned, how prepared, and how soon maybe that plan was. Ask if they're willing to have the plan disabled and seek advice if they are not. This is, again, where we might need to consult. We do know that, sometimes with adults or, again, teenagers, if lethal means are guns or pills, we know police will take guns to disable. We know pharmacists will take pills to help disable. So that's important to keep in mind as well. Also, since we're working with minors primarily, we can assist parents to make sure they disable that plan if there's a weapon or other lethal means at home. We want to ask if there's alcohol, drug, or medication concerns, because if they have access, we want to be able to disable that access. We also want to assess if there was prior suicide behavior. Have they had thoughts of suicide before? We want to ask if they have learned what might keep them safe for now. Maybe make an appointment with a doctor sooner if possible. Maybe helping them make that appointment. Perhaps reconnect with safety supports. Maybe that's a person who maybe does bring them hope, was a part of their turning point. Build on anything positive for safety to be realistic. Ask if there are any mental health concerns. Is their next step for assessment someone to make an appointment with, a therapist that they have been to before but just haven't had a recent appointment? You want to make sure to make an appointment with a mental health provider sooner if possible, or make a referral as soon as possible. For the last part, you see safety aids, and this is the least amount of guidance that we need to directly provide. And this involves situations, strengths, and supports. So if there's a need for important situational changes, ask the person in crisis experiencing suicidal ideation, what is doable now? Change should be important to their sense of safety. It should be relatively easy to do, and it needs to be doable now or at least soon. And if it can't be now or soon, suggest that the change can be made in the future. Going from situations to strengths available, we can ask, which can you use now? Consider strengths that are useful for safety now. Look for strengths that the person believes are available and relevant, and maybe reinforce anything that might realistically support safety. For the last, strengths to supports are needed. Who is able and available and acceptable? And again, we know as mandatory reporters that parents are usually the supports we need to be in contact with first. But we always want to work with the person in crisis on and agree on an emergency contact. We want to encourage appointment with a medical doctor to the parent, especially if they're minors. We want to inform about supports, but accept what the person regards as able, available, and acceptable. The last task and the final one in this phase is confirm actions. So we went from what to who in the develop safe plan to the when and the how. So we want to decide when things are going to be done. We want to identify the most important part of the plan and the first steps needed to achieve it. We want to avoid complex plans. Make it simple steps. Always include a safety contact. We can practice parts involving others. We can have them confirm with us what those next steps are, who those safety contacts are, who they're going to reach out to. You will see this in an example that my co-counselor and I are providing of this entire conversation, the entire PAL model, where you see us go through the 3 phases and the 6 steps of the caregiver, those tasks. You're going to see how she helps me practice the parts involving other people as a part of confirming actions to keep me as the client safe for now. So again, just to put this visual in your mind, the PAL model, Pathway to Assisting Life, the first phase ultimately communicates that you care. The second phase ultimately communicates that you will try to understand. And the last phase, that you will help. You want to patiently hear their story, give that the time it deserves, and you want to persistently support their turning to safety. This conversation can work out of sync if you move too fast or slow through the model. So for instance, if it was out of sync because it was too fast, this could be an example of, let's say a veteran is calling in to the new 988 number or a call center for help. And, while the call center is maybe asking questions, they're asking too many back to back, and they are rushing through the story, and the veteran is not given the time to let his story be heard or known. And so while the person in crisis, the veteran, is acknowledging thoughts of suicide, the caregiver, or maybe the person at the call center in this example, moved to developing a safe plan before they even tried to hear the story thoroughly and patiently, or to help the person find a turning point. So moving from asking the question of suicide to developing a safe plan and just breezing through that second phase of the model, that is out of sync too fast. Now, out of sync too slow, let's say for an example, there is a patient going to see her family doctor. The patient is a middle-aged woman. She was ready to have the issue of suicide identified. Many invitations that she gave to this doctor that the doctor could have explored and then asked the question of suicide. And instead, the caregiver or the doctor in this example did not ask because a suicide first aid model was not being used. So essentially, something too slow is that this doctor in this example did not explore the invitations that the patient was giving her. She did not ask the question of suicide. While she heard a little bit of the story of what was going on, again, all of these invitations that she chose not to explore, she was hearing some of the story, but did not explore those invitations, did not ask the question. And in this situation, the doctor just wrote a prescription for meds. And so essentially, although that could be a part of a safe plan, moved way too slow and did not ask and give that patient any suicide first aid. So best practice communicates I care initially. This happens when you explore their symptoms, life events, and more. Asking the question and patiently hearing their story communicates that you will try to understand. When you move to persistently support their turning to safety and work through a plan that keeps them safe for now, and they can confirm those actions, you are communicating that you are there to help. Themes during the intervention. So obviously you can see if you picture our triangle and the 3 parts, we have the colors kind of coded. You see our 3 phases of connecting with suicide, understanding choices, assisting life. So the transition from death to life usually requires that the person with suicide thoughts feels that their story about suicide has been heard. This feeling of being understood frees their life side to begin to speak. So if you think about someone in a mentally emotional state where, instead of like, sometimes we talk about that analogy of like an angel on one shoulder speaking to us and a devil on one shoulder speaking to us, right? Instead, let's think about in our head, there's a life chair versus a death chair. So if you think about, this person in that first phase of this model is sitting in the death chair. They are connecting with suicide. But as you transition through hearing their story and moving through the tasks that the caregiver can provide, all of a sudden they are feeling more understood, and it frees that life chair, that life side to begin to speak and provide hope and a turning point. Going to the next theme, the transition from the past to the future usually requires that person with suicide thoughts to come into the present and talking about the past. For some, letting go of the past is a very important step. So they move from the past, hearing their story in the present, what's happening right now, to the future. What is that safety plan? Confirming actions. What will we do from here? The last theme and the last transition from being alone to being supported usually requires that the person with suicide thoughts engages with the caregiver. For some, coming to trust another person is a very important step to helping them feel engaged, but then supported. Usually you can also see examples, and I feel like I have been guilty of this in the past before I was trained in this model, that when you are with a person, we have had star athletes who have had thoughts of suicide. We have had students who are talented, gifted, people who on the outside looking in look like they have it all together. And so quickly, we as the caregiver and the school counselor can jump to the life chair for them. Don't you want to live for your younger sister? Don't you want to continue with all-state basketball? You are so important to your parents. Don't you want to live for them, right? We cannot give reasons for that person to live because they're in such a place in the death chair that they don't see that. They have to come to the conclusion of their own turning to safety, but we also can't sit in the life chair for them, giving them reasons to live. We have to leave that life chair empty so that there is space for them to move from the death chair to the life chair themselves and that transition. So again, we can't be out of sync and too fast, rushing and giving them reasons to live because those reasons aren't valid to them in that state. We have to leave that life chair open so that they can transition to it themselves through the turning point and through the SAFE plan. If you were to Google the PAL model, the Pathway for Assisting Life, this is what you would see. So you can see the phases that we have walked through: connecting with suicide, understanding choices to assisting life. You can see the 6 tasks of the caregiver broken down 2 per phase. They kind of write them on the edges a little bit. You can also see the 3 themes that we move through, from death to uncertainty to life, from past, present to future, and from alone, engaged, and supported. So you can see this full model now that we walk through each phase, each task, and through that whole model start to finish. This is putting it all together, all of the steps, all of the themes. Now you guys are going to see an actual example of this model between my co-counselor and myself. I'm pretending to be a student, and I want to make you aware that all the issues I come to the table with as the student are not issues that are true for me in my real life. I am acting, but I do feel like this is the best way for you to learn this model, is by seeing it in action. And I feel like if you were to do the 2-day full training, you would have so much time to role play this yourself as the caregiver, as the person at risk. And you would be able to role play and be able to say these things to a state where you feel less intimidated by it. It's helpful to go through this out loud so that conversation doesn't feel as intimidating. You get more comfortable with it to assist others. But then also, the model I'm sharing with you is obviously in no way replacement of the actual training. And I would still highly recommend that you would take the training as you get into the field of school counseling. But this is a way to walk through it in the sense of, this is the model I use. This is the model I've had the most success with. This model makes sense in every way for my work as a school counselor. And hopefully it starts you out in the field with a direction and the words and the steps to assist someone with thoughts of suicide. But I would still always recommend the training so that you can be certified in suicide first aid as well. So again, it is no replacement of the actual training.
Becky, it's so great to see you today.
Hey, Mrs. Bowden. Yeah, sorry I'm taking up your time. I just feel like I'm a burden to everybody.
You're not a burden at all. I have all the time in the world. What's going on?
Well, last week when you were like in the class and talking to us about our FAFSA, I don't know. I thought it'd be like good to talk to you because I just found out recently that I didn't make the varsity volleyball team, and I don't know. I've been playing volleyball like my whole life. So it just feels like if I'm not a varsity athlete, then like, who am I? And I feel like worthless. My parents told me recently that they're going to get divorced, and they've been fighting for a long time. And I don't know. It's just, family feels like a mess right now.
Yeah. So you have a lot of things going on in your life right now.
Yeah, and my boyfriend broke up. Like, feels like everything's going wrong. Nothing will go right. It's just, it all just feels like pointless, you know?
So it sounds like volleyball was a huge part of your identity. And so now that you feel like you don't have that anymore, you don't really know where to go or where to find your support.
Yeah, and like, all my teammates used to be such a support for me, but like not being on the team with them, I just feel like not good enough for them. Like, so I don't even talk to them anymore. And they don't even like snap me anymore. They don't even talk to me. Even sometimes at school, it's like they don't even care. So it just, I don't care.
Yeah, that sounds really lonely.
Yeah, it is.
So with some of these things that you're saying, how parents are getting divorced, that you feel like you don't have that support system, something you love, you feel like has gotten taken away from you. I have to ask, do you feel like killing yourself?
I mean, I haven't said this out loud or told anyone, but yeah, I have.
Have you thought about what you would do, your plan?
My mom takes some medication, probably from stuff with my dad and my family. And I know where she keeps it. It's like in the medicine cabinet in her bathroom. And I mean, I've gone in there and I've opened up the cabinet and I've just stared at it. And I don't know how many I'd have to take, but I'd try to take enough.
Tell me how long you've been having these thoughts for.
Probably for a month. Things have just like continued to go downhill since then. Like at first it was the volleyball, and then like no friends, and then my boyfriend broke up with me, and then my parents telling me there's divorce. Like all that has happened in the last like month or two, and nothing is getting better. It doesn't feel like anything will get better. Like it just feels really hopeless. And I don't know, it feels like probably a month, but it feels almost like it's been longer.
Well, I'm sure, I mean, that's a lot to carry around to not have anyone to talk to about it. So thank you for coming in today. I know it takes a lot of courage to talk about these things and bring up those thoughts, but I feel like that shows that maybe you do want to take a step towards finding a little bit more hope.
Yeah, I guess. I don't even know like what brought me in here. It's just like seeing you last week. It was just like, it felt like a place to go, or like, I don't know. I don't feel like I could talk to anyone else. And, but yeah, I don't even know what made me come in, but I guess here I am.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's been times where you have gone into your bathroom, looked in the medicine cabinet, but something has stopped you those times not to take those pills. Tell me a little bit about what goes on through your mind.
I feel like I just like stand there and stare. And it's like, I don't think about like how people would care if I was gone, like, because I don't think people would care. But like one thing I do see is like in middle school, my volleyball coach was like, she just meant a lot to me and still does. But like, I don't see her anymore really. Like she's at the middle school, I'm at the high school. Life's busy. Like I work and, but I just kind of pictured her face, and I just like pictured, like, I don't know what she'd say, or like, I just pictured how she's talked to me before, and she did seem to care. And that was just kind of what I saw, and I guess I walked away.
Yeah. So earlier when you mentioned you feel like you don't have any friends anymore, nobody cares. It sounds like there's at least one person in your life that you know cares deeply about you.
I mean, I would hope so. Like, I don't know if she would care as much now, not being her player. It's been a couple of years. But I mean, I know that then I sure felt cared for.
Tell me about your family. So I know you mentioned your mom and dad. Is there anybody else at home?
I do have an older sister. You know, when she was at home, we actually got along pretty well for being sisters in a house. And, you know, I just felt like that was like the good old times when like our family did stuff together and we got along and
things felt a little easier.
Yeah, like it felt, you know, that was when I was getting better at volleyball, and I felt like I had, like my parents would come to my games and my sister was there, and like I'd, you know, see her like in and out from like high school and stuff with friends. But now she's like going to college out of state, and just now I feel like an only child, and I know she's busy and I don't want to bother her, but I just feel like our check-ins are like less and less. And I just don't even know if she cares anymore.
And I wonder if she even realizes everything that you're going through right now, if you haven't even given her the chance to know.
Yeah, I guess I never thought I wanted to bother her with it. It just felt like anyone I talked to, like I just would burden them with how I feel. And I just feel like she'd be busy and wouldn't have time to have the conversation with me, or she'd tell mom and dad, and they're going through their own stuff. So like they can't take care of my stuff too. But it's like, I do miss her, but it doesn't feel like enough right now.
Yeah. So what do you think would happen if you got out your phone and texted your sister right now and just said that you need to talk to her? Maybe some things you want to fill in on. You don't know until you try, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I haven't. And so, I mean, I don't think it would be hard to text her, and at least then she could, I guess, call me when she does have time. Maybe if I alluded to like it being more serious, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I would hope she'd care. I'm almost worried like how she'd react, but it's probably still worth trying.
Okay. So before you leave today, you will text your sister and tell her that you need to talk.
Yeah. Maybe I can do that in here before I go
Yeah.
to class or something.
That makes me wonder about your volleyball coach too. I know it's probably been a few years since you've reached out, but I'm confident that they still care about you a ton. So do you think another good step would be reaching out to them and seeing if they would have a chance to talk? I'm sure they'd be happy to.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to talk to her, and I don't know, like one of my first thoughts when I didn't make varsity is like, would I go help coach or something? And then I just felt like I'm not good enough for varsity. Why would I be good enough to help coach, you know? But, you know, maybe it's just one conversation at a time, I guess.
So it sounds like that's something you could possibly look forward to, is even though you can't be on the volleyball team this season at the high school, but let's explore those different opportunities, maybe at the junior high, and see if that's something that we can make happen.
Yeah, I guess it's worth a shot. I mean, I feel like nothing could really get worse right now. Just feel like at rock bottom. So maybe that would be a way forward or something.
Yeah. So texting your sister, reaching out to your volleyball coach is a way that we can keep you safe for now.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and I guess like circling back to the first time you said, like, you have thought about killing yourself. You've thought about taking those pills from your mom. Have you tried anything like that before?
You know, I came close. I opened the top of one of her bottles. And again, that's like when I kind of saw coach, like what she'd say, like, you know, she'd get on us a lot if we were like doing something stupid. And I just felt like she'd be like, you know, that's stupid, but I always listened to her. Like it didn't, I don't know, it still felt like encouraging when she was correcting us. And yeah, that's the closest I've come though. But I mean, they're still there. Like I could go home today and they're still there, and that's kind of tempting, but.
Do your parents know about how you've been feeling? You haven't talked to them about it?
No, I'm kind of worried too. Like I don't want my mess to be part of why they're also getting a divorce. Yeah.
So as you know, I care about you a ton, and my job is to keep you safe. So another step we need to take today is contacting your mom or dad and telling them how you've been feeling, and that you know that there's medication in the cabinet.
Yeah.
And I know that's a really hard conversation, and it can feel scary to admit these things. So I want to hear like what would make it the least scary for you. Would you rather have me call my own? Do you want to have that conversation with them while I sit in here with you? Would it be easier for you to sit in here with me as I make the call?
Yeah, it's so hard. For them to know, but I guess I think I'd rather not be in here. Like I get you have to, but I don't think I want to hear their first response. I'm afraid they're going to get mad, and I don't want to feel like they're mad at me. And so I guess if they talk to you first, maybe they won't be as mad at me.
Okay, so let's plan on doing that. So what I'll have you do is have you sit outside in our waiting area with Mrs. Hinders, our counseling secretary. And then I'll make a phone call to your parents, and we'll make sure that they keep those pills or take them out of your house, or, you know, put them somewhere where you can't access them. Do you think that's a fair thing to do? Especially because remember, we're keeping you safe for now.
Yeah. Yeah, that probably would be a good idea.
So let's do that. And then what are you going to do? There's 2 people you're going to talk to.
I'm going to text my sister, reach out to her, hopefully talk soon. My mom will probably call her too, so maybe she'll get her call with my text.
Okay.
And I'm going to reach out to coach. Yeah, I'll text her too, and then maybe she'll have time to get together with me sometime this week or something, or maybe I go to practice and
yeah,
help or something.
That sounds great. And then tomorrow, why don't you stop back in here, up in here, and we'll follow up on how those conversations went. And, you know, I can reach out to your volleyball coach as well and see if it'd be easier to set something up during the school day. So will you get you connected with that?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Mrs. Bowden.
Yeah. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah. I mean, a lot better than I guess the one I came in here with.
All right. So let's start with that and then we'll take it a day at a time.
Okay. Here is a link, a couple links to great resources from the Texas Education Agency. They have so many great resources. Texas is kind of ahead of the game where they've actually adopted our ASCA national model as their state model. And so because of that, they have done a lot of work with crisis prevention and intervention in their schools, in their school counseling programs, but also in their Project Restore. So I really encourage you to explore what the Texas Education Agency has to offer and the great resources based on trauma-informed series. So this is another resource for you. In UIU Learn, I want you to, after reading the two ASCA position statements, as well as the brief summary I provided of QPR and the ASIST model, to think about one new learning for you and how it will impact your future practice as a school counselor. What's ahead? So in week 12, we are going to be doing a group Zoom together, and I will be going over ASCA's 4th edition templates, which will be very helpful for you guys as a group working towards the Comprehensive School Counseling Project. Week 13, you guys are going to look at the ASCA student standards in more detail, the mindsets and behaviors standards for student success, but also see a video about how school counselors impact school-wide culture and climate. And then week 14, you guys are going to be working on that comprehensive school counseling program project that will be due the Monday of week 15. All right. So we just finished up part 3 of ACEs and looking at crisis prevention. That's all we have for week 11. I hope you guys have a great week.